Hey there.
Hello.
Good to be with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Same.
All right, so we got this book here, um, Plotinus or the Simplicity of Vision by Pierre. How
Pierre.
do you- Yeah, Pierre. Hadot. Okay. This was a really interesting read. I really enjoyed learning more about Plotinus. I've just kind of skimmed through the Enneads, I believe is how you say it. And I loved how this author goes through in short chapters and like highlights certain themes in Plotinus and really like draws out a lot of his thought throughout, highlighting different themes in particular. And one thing that I loved about it is that made me think of a quote from Thomas A. Kempis is that how in chapter one, entitled Portrait, it kind of gives like a biography of Plotinus and how he was such like a self-effacing person in the sense of like he didn't really ever write about much about his personal life, or it was never like factored into his philosophy very much, like where he was from, or his history, or anything like that. Like he was kind of like a personless person. And the quote that it reminds me of by Thomas A. Kempis is, "It matters not who said what. What matters is what was said." And I just think it's like such a diametrically opposed point of view from the 21st century and like American culture, where like everyone is seeking fame and fortune, and um, we're obsessed with selfies and like social media and getting likes, and just how richly different Plotinus's viewpoint on what mattered in life is. And it's really like has nothing to do with our own individual ego self or anything like that. It's more of tapping into like the infinite, or like the good, as he would call it. And I just think that's like we need more of that in our culture. Uh, Not getting fixated on our own individual persons.
I love that idea. It's so true. I see this in academia all the time, and I often wonder how to sort of deal with it myself. I was reading during winter break the correspondence between Carl Jung and Freud, and Freud always had a preoccupation with sort of who owns different ideas. And I think he actually stopped correspondence with William Fleiss because he was worried that they had exchanged too many conversations about what Freud wanted to write about and what he wanted to establish as his sort of kind of opus. And it's so sad. I think it's heartbreaking because the best ideas come, at least for me, in collaboration. I and then it is hard when you want to publish and you're worried about plagiarizing and Jung would always say that, well, I hope I'm not, saying what you were going to publish. And then the whole thing about like Sabina Spielrein and women throughout history talking with men about ideas, and then the women don't end up publishing or they end up being secretaries to men. And so it's such a balance. But when, as you said, you are focused on truth and you're focused on virtue and the collective and yourself as an individual having union with the divine, maybe that's the solution. Maybe all of those kind of worries about proprietary ideas can fall away.
Yeah, it reminds me of something Nikola Tesla said because he got like ripped off all the time. His ideas they got like stolen and patented, and then he would like end up to die penniless and alone. And he said at one point, "I don't care." Something to the effect like, "I don't care that they steal my ideas. I only care that they don't have any of their own." It's so good.
Oh,
But
that's so funny.
yeah, it's he. I mean, exactly. So it's interesting. Like Freud, definitely. I feel like I remember you said in one of your videos on your Hypatia Philosophy YouTube channel, like saying you're going over the letters between Freud and Jung, and I think Freud or Jung says at one point like he's writing to Jung's writing to Freud about how he's going to be writing on like religion. I think maybe he was working
Mhm.
on totem and taboo. And he says something to the effect that like, oh, like you would make like a fierce rival if one must speak of rivalry, because I feel like he kind of felt like he had like a keen insight on like psychology and religion maybe,
Yeah.
and or mythology and religion and psychology. And then so for Freud to be kind of stepping in those waters and working on a book on that topic, I feel like he was like, this is kind of my turf. Like, I'm sure you're gonna have something different than what I would say about it. So it's like a good thing. But it is kind of like intimidating because he was such like a towering figure in the field. But but yeah, it's just interesting how we wrestle with our egos. And I love how Plotinus is more like not seeking to like, I don't know, do away with the his individuality or his personality, but just like kind of focus it into a channel of being receptive to the divine presence, or like to be a revealer of the good, or have the good be revealed to it and it to be like kind of a conduit for it.
Absolutely. I wonder if it's because of his idea that even though you're going inside and trying to connect with your true self, once you really do that, the goal is union with the divine. And I think that Hadot talks about this when he refers to Kristeva and her critiques of the autoeroticism that it seems like spiritual people and Plotinus, when they get preoccupied with solitude and meditation and trying to find the divine within, is that. And I think many of us who are following that path have this worry as well sometimes that, are we, and even when we talk about self-love or when that's talked about in like psychological circles, you know, how can we avoid being sort of falling to the myth of narcissists and being narcissistic? And so Hadot says that, or it said in the introduction that that's not really what Plotinus thinks about the self. The true self is really beyond the self as we would think of it. It's kind of like this sense of beauty and this sense of joy and ecstasy when you get into that state where you are feeling this peace and you're feeling connected. It's kind of like you're connecting with your true self is the cosmic self. You're connecting, and what feels so, I think, enlightened or good is because you're connecting to cosmic energies, you're connecting to the whole. And so there's this idea that when you reach the pinnacle, when you reach the highest place that you want to just live in and dwell in, you don't want to return to your mundane kind of human exigencies. You are connecting with God and that falls away. Like it reminds me of the medieval mystics, like especially the female mystics, like Julian of Norwich and Hildegard and Catherine of Siena, where they wanted their ultimate goal was annihilation of the soul, to be an empty receptacle, to be absorbed completely within God.
Yeah. Yeah, at one point, reading the book, it totally gave me like another mystic, a female mystic vibe of Simone Weil. Like,
Hmm.
she says that ownership is a false god, and that we really own nothing because mere chance can strip us of everything we think we possess, except for one thing, and that is the power to say "I." It is this that we must give to God, that is to destroy. And it's kind of like a little dark way of framing it, but I just love that insight so much, and the notion of like removing one's false self from the equation of whatever one's being faced with, whatever difficulty or hardship, or loss or what have you, um, goes a long way in finding like an understanding, or a peace that transcends understanding. Um, and so, yeah, I think he's on the right path. Um, or something else I was going to say based off what you had mentioned. Oh yeah, it definitely gives me also, yeah, like you mentioned the medieval mystics, like what's his name? His name is Meister Eckhart.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like Meister Eckhart, he likes the word "I" a lot. I mean, I guess Plotinus uses it quite a lot too, but I don't know. But it's like a similar idea, right? Like getting out of this notion of false self and getting into that higher notion of self. And that's why in the book it talks about how, a critic, I think it mentions in the introduction, a critic of, well, not critic, yeah, I guess technically a critic, was kind of pointing out that Plotinus's thought might be like autoerotic, because it's like kind of, you know finding ecstasy in union with your quote highest self. And so it's kind of like this almost like regressive, like self-serving type of pleasure seeking. But as you point out, that's like missing the point of what Plotinus was saying, because it's not like the self that we typically think of or have in our mind. It's like basically like identical with God. um, but I do have to say, it makes me think that, you know, God, the creation or whatever you want to call it, the universe, and the good finding itself in the soul of the individual and recognizing itself there, and then the individual recognizing one's highest aspect of oneself to be identical to God. It does make me think that, like, isn't it all kind of like divine autoeroticism of some kind? If that makes any sense. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it does maybe beg the question, like, do we need to really be that worried and pathologize self-love? Because I think so many of us, so many people, I think the issue is not loving oneself too much or narcissism. It's not understanding how beautiful you really are. And the paradox is always, it like goes back to that verse, love your neighbor as yourself. If you want to love your neighbor then very deeply and intimately and authentically, then you have to first do that for yourself. So yeah, maybe it's kind of a distraction that we don't necessarily have to worry about, because I know that when I can sort of gain true self-love, not because of external validation or kind of like what Jung talks about, ego inflation. But when really I do my shadow work and I feel as if I'm connecting with my true self, I then can love others more cleanly. I don't want to create noise or energetic noise for other people. I want to feel my big feelings privately and work through them and get out of victim mentality and focus on, what the Stoics say, that why are you focusing on how someone else insulted you or angered you or triggered you? The fact that you were triggered means that there's a deep wound inside of you, and that's where you should look. And then I'm able to return to communion and to community with other people in hopefully like a cleaner way.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I think I'm trying to relate it to the notion of how, if God is, or the good or whatever you want to call it, is, really loving himself through loving us, and our love for God is identical for also God's love for himself. Like, I guess instead of it being like a pathological self-love on the divine's part, it's more of like a like you're saying, like a purifying of love, for the sake of its like growth and expansion, and it doesn't have to be like viewed as pathological by any means.
Hmm. Yeah, and I really love Plotinus's passage in the Treatise on Beauty about the sculpture and the sculptor as self.
Mm.
So I think ego inflation would be, adding to the self, like, oh, these are my accomplishments or these are my virtues. But for Plotinus in that passage, which it's kind of long, but I would love for like one of us to read it because it's so good. It's like this metaphor of chipping away, like you're chipping to heal and to get to your true self and to get to intimate communion and connection with other people. It's not something you add, but it's something that you remove the obstruction, you remove the hindrances that are keeping you from connecting to the divine and feeling your own soul and the soul of another.
Yeah, it's like uncreation, like you're like you're creating through taking away, as opposed to like stacking your badges and being like, oh, look how great I am. It's like what's here is false, what here is not the true image. And it's like, yeah, very well said. I like that. It is a good like analogy or image of what he's wanting to accomplish. um, and I think like, it gets reiterated in different ways throughout the book. I'd be down for the quote. I don't know where it's located
It's in a
exactly.
couple of places. It's on page 14 for sure. It starts out saying, go back inside yourself and look. If you do not see yourself as beautiful, then do as a sculptor does with a statue he wants to make beautiful. He chisels away one part and levels off another, makes one spot smooth and another clear until he shows forth a beautiful face on the statue. Like him, remove what is superfluous, straighten whatever is crooked, clean up what is dark, and make it bright, and never stop sculpting your statue. Which also kind of reminds me of Voltaire, like cultivating your garden. I don't know if that connects.
Yeah.
But he says, be confident in yourself. You have already ascended here and now and no longer need someone to show you the way. Open your eyes and see. This alone is the eye that sees the immense beauty. So, what I imagine is that, you're chipping away at this sculpture and maybe like something emerges. And there's like in Platonism, it seems like there's levels of the self and levels of reality. And so maybe at first there's this beautiful kind of archetype of self, like maybe you imagine yourself as, I don't know, like Athena or Aphrodite or Pandora or anyone. And then you keep chiseling away, and eventually, like nothing is there. And that's what I think the true self is for Plotinus. It's because he says that it's light and it's a different way of seeing.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty intense when he gets into the light being beheld is the light that beholds and all of that fun stuff. Yeah, I love the images so much. I feel like it does. It's kind of reminds me of this book. I never read it, but my friend told me about it. It's like Art and Fear, and it's like I just get the image of like you're sculpting away at the statue, and one wrong hit of the hammer and the chisel, and like there goes an arm, and it's like oh no, it's like you're like doing this art, and there's like this dynamic between presence and like unfolding and like just the fear of like screwing up whatever this could be. um yeah, it's kind of like anxiety ridden, uh but I feel like it's interesting to me how he talks about it, kind of jumping way ahead, just in like how does one overcome the anxiety that can be induced when sculpting the true self that is identical to the good in one's soul. When he talks about like grace and the importance of grace and grace descending and illuminating the individual in like a flash. um so I feel like there's a lot of hopefulness in Plotinus in the sense of like you know God or the good is like seeking to be made present to people. And so, once by grace, an individual has been like illuminated by the good, then like, and you get like a sense and a feel and a taste of the good, then you can like practice virtue and start, the stripping away process of removing the things that hinder you from like contemplating the good in a more continuous fashion. So I guess some of the fear of not wanting to screw up um, the project that is, um, just becoming a conduit for the good is that like the good is also trying to become like a, um, reveal itself to us. And so we're not like alone in the process.
That's really interesting. I don't think I've thought recently about anxiety and fear in terms of the spiritual path. And I don't know, I'd love you to say more about that. Like how might that happen? Because I guess it's so curious to me because I feel like I have a lot of anxiety, but I've never thought about having anxiety about that.
Well, I mean, I think there could be multiple like layers. I'm just thinking of in particular like using the image of making a sculpture of our true selves, and this idea just kind of struck me like man, like one wrong move and you could really screw up that image. But I think in a general sense, um, you know I think about things like individuation and the process of individuation, right? Just psychologically speaking. And I don't know, like, it's just one of those things, like, when you have an option before you, or you find yourself in a situation and you have choices to make. And it's like, are these choices really in line with like my deepest path and like my truest self? Or is this a matter of like a colossal mistake, you know, and like no one really can tell you like which direction or which path to go down or what choice to make and how to make it. Like it's really just up to you. And so um you know, I guess in the that's where, you know, in terms of individuation, that's where like things like dream analysis and active imagination come into play, where you can kind of gain that like feedback from, you know, your unconscious and kind of work through some of those options and what your like real heart's desires are, in terms of how to proceed forward in life in the different various ways. But I guess when it comes to the spiritual aspect of it, you know, it's like Paul, like work out your salvation in fear and trembling. um you know, because you just you know, obviously like Christianity has like a lot of anxiety ridden aspects to it, with like the concept of hell and blah blah blah, like sin and penalty and all this. But like I guess for me, just in terms of the how Plotinus looks at it, is like I think it's really fascinating the fact that he talks about grace so much, and that it is such like a central aspect in terms of like the philosophical way of life is like moments of grace from the good kind of revealing themselves to us. And I just think it's like super heartwarming and encouraging that like we're not alone on the path towards like the divine. The divine's also like treading our direction.
Yeah, I would agree. I love the idea of grace because otherwise it seems like self-development and ascending on, in the spiritual path, it just seems impossible. And Plotinus puts it in a way where it's not like what our task is not to necessarily put forth all of this effort in an active way all the time, to think that we can finally achieve or obtain something. Like what we have to do is prepare ourselves for whenever the divine sort of lights upon us. It reminds me of actually Plato's Symposium and Socrates' speech, where they're talking about Eros not as a god, but as a daimon, and how Eros specifically, that particular daimon, is one that you can't capture, you can't try to possess, and you can't exist forever in connection with. It comes and it goes. It happens to you like a storm, over the sea, and you can't really predict it. And I really see that in Plotinus about connecting to beauty, like feeling beauty, having, a catalyst for your eros, for your creativity, and feeling that sense of self and peace. Like it's almost paradoxical. It's like the more you try to contain it and obtain it, the further you get away from it.
Yeah, like you can't capture it. It can capture you, but you can't capture it. I think he's like straight up says that, or he says something to that effect at one point. Or he does mention, whether it be the author Plotinus, he does talk about how, you know, when it comes to beauty being manifested into the world and we get kind of like enraptured in it, it's like there's always something extra that the beauty conveys, more than just whatever like our vision captures. There's this transcendent aspect to beauty that goes beyond the world, even though it like is contained, the world is contained in it, like it's not contained in the world. And I think that's part of why like anytime I've like tried to, I mean, obviously like a picture never does justice to whatever you're taking a picture of, but like even just trying to take a picture of something beautiful, like a lot of the times, especially if there's like another sentient presence, like a bird or something, it like always flies away, like just before I get the shot off. And like I don't know, there's just like always like this funny like interface between myself and trying to like capture something beautiful in the natural world, and it being like, no, like you can't capture this, it's like beyond your capacity to contain. um and so yeah.
And there's something really lovely in that because when we're striving, like let's say for beauty, and I really love the Greek idea of beauty because it's not only the aesthetic, but it's also the moral. There's some idea in the word kalan about nobility and virtue. And it seems like there can be such a shadow side to beauty or love. Love is also, I think, a really good concept because we can do all these things and strategize and try to figure out why we're not getting it or why it's elusive. And I think that can be a really self-destructive kind of path. And so characterizing it as, we are a temple and we are just preparing ourselves for the dwelling and the incoming of the Spirit. We're it's sort of like a beautiful kind of restful, peaceful, not quite passivity, but almost. And it also reminds me of the Taoist concept of Wu Wei. Sometimes you can be trying so hard to accomplish something and it just doesn't work. It's like I don't know, hitting your head against the wall. And so Wu Wei says that, well, go back and work on yourself, be kind of work on it indirectly, and you will become the kind of person for whom whatever task you want to accomplish will be possible.
Yeah, I do really enjoy the way he talks about like, because I think the author at one point like kind of juxtapositions Plato's ascent to the good
Mhm.
versus Plotinus, and Plotinus is much more like um, a matter of, like you say, like preparing the ground of your soul, like kind of almost like a garden bed, right? Like you're pulling out the weeds, you're like making sure it's moist, like you're making sure it's not like too hot, or like you have some shade, or you're perfecting the conditions by which the good can make itself manifested in your soul. You're not so much like that's the work. It's like you said earlier about the statue. It's like removing the things, the obstacles in the way. Um, and I just think it's like really good imagery to kind of convey like his approach to um, union with the good, as opposed to Plato, who is like striving and like always wanting to ascend higher and higher, and like and then what Plato does with it once he does ascend to kind of like the world of forms or beyond to the good or what have you, like wanting to kind of make use of that in some kind of utilitarian way, and like come back and like set up institutions of learning, or like the organization of the state and things like this that have like importance for like life here down below. And Plotinus is more like, I just want to stay up there. Like I just want to stay in that state of union and not have to deal with such things.
Yeah, I remember that quote. That I thought that was a really helpful comparison as well. And it is so blissful being connected with soul. And when you're doing shadow work, having a breakthrough and moving from an agitated state to one of peace. And it does feel like clarity. I think about C.S. Lewis, and I never can remember the quote because it was like I've read whatever book I read of his like 20 years ago. But I remember he says something about God being God because of how he can see. And I think about, and I wrote it down. So. The verse from First Corinthians 13:12, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as also I am known. And just this idea of as we have a clear vision of reality and each other and ourselves, that is where sort of the love comes in, and that is where the peace comes in. Like the kind of love that doesn't eventually turn into contempt or some sort of possession or jealousy, but it is a love that is pure and kind of free and truly feels peaceful.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting too. Like he talks about, and again, juxtapositioning Plato and Plotinus. How what is it like their idea of love and like the role love plays in as like a springboard, as it were, to contemplating the good. For Plato, it is like love for the student or the pupil, I guess, and then kind of rising up from that kind of like almost like is it like erotic? I'm not sure. It kind of sounds like it. And then, but then it coming into higher levels of contemplation towards the forms and eventually the good, whereas Plotinus was more like using love as a metaphor. Like, well, first of all, his students were like there was also women present. It wasn't just men, and using it as like more of like an allegory um, for like kind of like the rapture of love that kind of spontaneously takes possession of one's heart, and that being kind of again like just different than Plato's take on it. But yeah, I love the Corinthian quote.
Yeah, it's always one of my favorites because I really do personally believe that love is basically like being known. Like that's what it feels like to be loved, is that someone wants to know you. And the same thing to love means that you want to know another person deeply. And if you think about that in terms of God, um, it's just so hard to imagine that God can know us completely in all our versions and just love us infinitely. It's really difficult for, I think, humans to do, and I think it's because we have a limited perspective. It's hard to really see and to know ourselves and the other.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the grace comes in for me again, like just in the terms of like the Christian tradition, like the amount of like mercy and grace that is involved in God knowing every aspect of myself and like still choosing to want to be like in contact and communion and like just fellowship and just to relate to this wretched vessel that I can be is like it's humbling and it's inspiring to want to go out and give that grace and extend that mercy for those who have wronged us and to not allow our wounded pride to keep us from participating in a love that like an agape love, like
Mhm.
that keeps no record of wrongs. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. What else did you see in here that caught your attention?
Well, I really did like the chapter on love. And there's a quote by Leonardo da Vinci on page 50. Observe the meanderings of each thing. If, in other words, you want to know a thing well and depict it well, observe the type of grace that is particular to it. And I think
Mm.
that's so interesting. Like maybe it's a different like meaning of grace than what we've been talking about, but I don't know. What do you think that means? Observe the type of grace that is peculiar to it if you want to know a thing well and depict it well.
It reminds me of Seinfeld. I don't know if you've seen that show very much, but like Elaine, she's like runs into her boss, or she has like that boss, and she's like, "Do you think I have grace?" And he's like, "You have some grace." But yeah, I mean, like, so I think grace, right? Like in the Christian Western world, I think it's like a term that gets pretty like misunderstood, or like you could understand it better. Like I think of grace in the Christian context, in particular, like God's action in our life. So like when it says like we're saved by grace, like we're saved by God's action in our life. And then I think just yeah, like kind of action in general. It's like the type of like how they move, right? Like how they move in the world,
Mhm.
how they show up in the world, how their presence manifests across space and time, and how it's animated by that divine spark and that their soul and the state of their soul. I think has a lot to play in terms of how they move in the world and the type of grace that they display. So really just keenly taking observation of other people in our lives and seeing how they move with those degrees of freedom and their volition. Um, yeah, and what they do with like the powers that have been given them. But yeah, I remember that quote as well, and it hit hard for sure.
Yeah, I really like how you're speaking about movement because there is kind of it's like an energy that you kind of observe, the grace that's peculiar to someone. And you're right, it's like how they move as well, like the rhythm, the dance. Um, and also on the next page, I guess there's a quote by Bergson, and it talks about for the one who contemplates the universe with the eyes of an artist. There's a lot about vision and seeing here. It
Mm-hmm.
is grace that is discerned through beauty and goodness that is discerned through grace. Each thing manifests in the movement that its form registers. The infinite generosity of a principle which gives itself. It is not without reason that we designate by the same word charm we see in the movement. Um, and then there was another quote about seeing the world on page 36. Let us imagine that we see the whole earth in this way, and the sea and all living things as in a transparent sphere in which it really would be possible to see everything. Let us keep within our soul the luminous representation of this sphere containing everything within itself. Keep this image within yourself and eliminate its mass, then eliminate the presentation you have within you of its spatial extension and its matter. It's like this dance between expanding, like seeing it, it almost sounds like a guided meditation or a visualization. Like, I don't know if you've ever done those particular kind of cosmic ones where you're trying to expand your vision out, like past your town, past your city, past the country, and then into the universe, and you're just kind of drifting in the like the black space of stars. But then also at the same time, you're simplifying and eliminating everything. So it's like all and it's like nothing at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's a mind trip for sure. But I think it gets to the heart of like what it is to be present with God, right? It's like God is everything and God is no thing in particular.
Mhm.
Um, so to develop an awareness of an ever expanding, like, I don't want to say cognitive field, but just like presence, but not having that presence be like identified with any one thing in particular. So it's like you're not going to be hindered by, like, for example, like people like idolaters, right? Like they want to make this one finite thing, whether it be like a stone, a statue, or some trinket, or some hill, or some Instagram following count, or whatever the one thing is. They want to make it like the most important thing, like the everything that they put value on or derive value from. But that would be like a mistake in the presence required to be illuminated by the good. Like like going back to what we said earlier, like no matter how beautiful a thing in this world is, or the world itself, like the true beauty of whatever it is that we're finding beautiful, like it transcends that object. Like it goes beyond the object, the beauty that it conveys. So we can't get stuck on like the finger pointing at the moon, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I feel really present and I'm kind of in the flow, whether it's giving a lecture or it's just losing myself in music or dance or conversation, when I really get to like the sweet spot of being present, and it's not always easy, I would say, for myself, but when I get to it, what like things just start falling away. Like my self-consciousness falls away, time falls away, and I'm just really enjoying the like whatever is happening. And I'm just not thinking of anything else. It's like nothing exists because of how my perspective is or my attention has been shifted or like it's an orientation.
Yeah, yeah. The it's interesting too. Like he talks somewhere in here about that very thing, like consciousness, as we typically understand it, being like kind of like divided, and having like this fixated attention on objects. But there's something in here it talks about where I don't remember where it was talking about it. Like kind of exactly what you're saying though, like when you get into that flow state and then you become like less aware almost. It's like
Mhm.
um or you're not allowing your consciousness to like trip you up, right?
Yeah.
And then you can just like again get out of your way and let the rhythm do its dance, so to speak.
Yeah, but it's so I don't know, would you agree like it's sometimes so hard to do that. And when we want it the most, it seems so elusive. It's how, and we can say it in different ways, right? But it's how to get into a really present state, how to get in the flow, how to forget about ourselves and how we're sounding or looking or being represented. Um, and that's the best times of our lives, right? Like that's where we're hitting bliss and nirvana, is when we come away from something and we don't even realize how much time has passed. And Plotinus says that we're like, that's kind of like our true self. That's our true state of being. But it seems, and we're always in contact with it. We're never separated from it. So I think like the question that then comes up for me is why then does it seem like not always accessible.
Yeah, it's like the habitual conscious mind, right? Like that's kind of a highly developed part of ourselves that kind of acts as, you know, the taskmaster in terms of like, what do I need to do right now? Like, what am I going to do later? Like, how bad did I screw up before? Like, um, and so it kind of, I think this conscious like layer of our psyche kind of is trying to like just basically like mucking it up, right? Like if we could like interrupt that um highly like refined and kind of like super critical judgmental conscious aspect of our mind and just kind of get into more of like I don't say like unconscious but like um it'd basically be like just an awareness without this is like going into like stuff like Krishnamurti talks about, right? Like being like highly observant, but like without naming it, right? Without judging it, without categorizing it, right? It's like all the things that like our conscious mind wants to do is like, oh, like this is a bad experience, or like, oh, that's a good experience, or like, oh, that person's ugly, like that person's pretty, like always like judging, right? Like always comparing, contrasting. And so it's like if we can tamper that part of our minds down and just be like hyper aware of the fact that like we are aware without labeling or judging, then I think we get more into that flow state. But we're just conditioned, right? Like through childhood and upbringing, education. Um, yeah, it's tough. It's tough to like break out of that. It's almost like a prison for our minds.
Yeah, it can feel that way. There's a couple of great quotes on 30 pages 32 and 33 about consciousness and kind of like connecting and the difficulty. 32, he says, it's not so much that we become aware of our higher self as we lose awareness of our lower self. And then why it's so challenging, perhaps, to kind of step across the threshold to this kind of like letting go or surrender of the ego or whatever it is. It says the self is afraid it will lose its self-consciousness and no longer possess itself. But the more intense an activity is, the less conscious it is.
Yeah.
Thought that was interesting. I think of children as well, right? Like they're so good at this.
Yeah, because they haven't been conditioned so much yet. And you're absolutely right. Like children do this perfectly. Um, kind of what makes them so unruly a little bit, but it's good. You know, there's nothing better than just watching a kid like just live it up, like his best life. So yeah, that was the quote. That was the section I was trying to think of where it was earlier. So thanks for finding that.
Yeah. So there must be a type of like playfulness to it, like a type of kind of confidence or self-trust or trust in the situation or the world, um, and then kind of some, I don't know, like an element of playfulness. I don't know if Plotinus ever talks about playfulness, but but I personally think that that's a part of like connecting to the divine and being present, at least for myself.
Yeah, well, like you said, kids like embody that type of presence so well. So it's definitely like a good illustration of like what getting into that state looks like and what it probably feels like. It's like, and you know, unless you become like children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven or whatever. So
Yes, that's a great
could be some
verse.
biblical parallel there.
It's so
But
good.
one second. let me see here. So it does say there on 33, such a state, talking about consciousness, such a state, however, cannot be prolonged. We are irredeemably conscious beings split into two. We want to seize these moments of unity, fixate them, and conserve them, but they escape us at the very moment when we think we have them, and we fall back from presence into memory. And it just goes like I wrote, like memory love or reality loves to hide. Like you know, not being able to capture kind of that eternal beauty, but like there's something about our conditioning or our hardwiring that like keeps it elusive for whatever reason. Um, but I like that quote.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I've seen this, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's, I guess, this study that at some point they did on kids, and they show like the difference between a very young child that has grown up in a dysfunctional family versus a child that's grown up in a relatively like good enough family of safety, and they have everything that they need. And the child that grows up in dysfunction or trauma will have a hard time concentrating or falling into, like, they put like blocks in front of both of the kids because they're hyper vigilant. They keep looking up to like have to monitor the situation or the environment, and
Mm,
like I guess look out for maybe danger and the lack of safety, whereas the kid that kind of grows up in the healthier home like just doesn't like is oblivious, like doesn't pay attention to anything around them at all. Like they are just, it doesn't matter if people come in, if a door slams, if someone drops something or whatever, they're just like in their world. And that's like the healthy place to be.
mm, yeah, yeah. That's interesting that the upbringing would have. I mean, it makes sense, but maybe the more traumatized we are, the more we're divided against ourselves and can't get into that flow state as easy. But
Yeah, it's like
what,
nervous system regulation.
yeah, well, it's like hyper vigilant, right? Like it's always got to be like you said, like checking out for danger around like every corner, because it doesn't have that like that balance or that like that sense of peace. So it's just like super on edge and hyper aware. It's like gets in its own way. Um, what did you think about his talks? His what he had to say about the Gnostics?
I was, really interested and surprised in that because when I started kind of looking into Neoplatonism, I connected it to Gnosticism because of how Plotinus talks about the one being like a sun that's emanating and producing, like everything comes from the sun and emanations. And that's the big thing about the Gnostic cosmology. You have source and everything starts to unfold and unwind, and like all of the, like in the pleroma, all of these different what are they called, like eons or ions, they are being created because like the source just wants to generate and create. But I'm glad that Hadot went over the idea that what was really different is that, yes, the Gnostics, some of them can be very dualistic, or maybe all of them, I don't know, can be very dualistic and think of the world and the body as a prison to escape. And even though Plotinus's student said Plotinus wishes that he didn't have a body or something, like Hadot says that Plotinus is so much more accepting of the body and the sense world and the material world, and it's not a prison, but it's a reflection of like God's um like order and uh, like harmony and beauty.
Yeah, I get you on like seeing a sense of both similarity and difference between Plotinus's thought and Gnostic thought. Um, Obviously, you know, they both are like emanationist, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
But and then again, like you mentioned, like he also seems to have view the body as kind of like um, this organ, you know, that is like impeding himself from attaining that lasting union with the divine.
Mhm.
Um, but as you say, also like he says that it's basically like it's a necessary thing, right? Like it's not like bad in and of itself. The natural world isn't bad in and of itself. And I think where he like mainly disagrees with the Gnostics is the notion that like the world is the product of like an evil demon, basically.
Oh, right. Yeah, the demiurge, the craftsman. Yeah, the yeah, in Gnosticism, it's yelled at both, and he's either malicious or just stupid. And so,
Yeah,
and a
ignorant.
kind of like a, I guess, a punishment for who is it? Sophia, who wanted to generate offspring on her own. And then, it's like the woman who goes off on her own to like produce asexually. Like she's like, no, slap on the hand. Your your child created all the chaos. But also
Pretty
another,
much, yeah.
yeah. Another thing is that a similarity that I thought of is the Gnostics' idea of like gnosis and direct experience going beyond sort of like through study, but then beyond study to be like awakened and then connect in an experiential way to source and then follow this kind of path or ascent. Like that also kind of reminded me of Neoplatonism.
Totally. Yeah, they share that as well. The direct experience with source is kind of what they're both aiming at. It's funny how much, you know, for getting along so well in so many areas, like he has pretty strong words against the Gnostics. Um, Let me see. It says on page 35, chapter 3, presence, talking about the Gnostics. Although the spiritual world is within us, it is also outside us. Just as it was enough to learn to look within ourselves in order to discover this world, so it is enough to learn how to look outside ourselves in order to perceive the spiritual world behind the world of appearances. The metamorphosis of inner vision, thus, has as its counterpart the metamorphosis of physical vision. The Gnostics, the Gnostic does not know how to look at the world. Um, so I just like I really love that about Plotinus, that he doesn't have this uh, vision of the world as being, you know, the prison planet universe just incarcerating our eternal spark in you know, a semi-divine, semi-fallen soul in you know, this meat sack of demonic matter. Makes me like super happy that he recognizes in the material world uh, the reflection of the spiritual presence being made manifested to us. Um, I'm in whole heart agreement with him on that, and against the Gnostics on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like more gentle and in alignment with my own kind of spiritual evolution that, I think there's a stage that maybe many of us go through where spirituality is equated to kind of almost escaping the mundane or like the suffering of the world or the kind of non like we see sort of like the human condition and certain its certain sort of demands as a burden that we wish we could transcend. We want to transcend our facticity because the divine is so intoxicating. And so there's a stage where I feel like many of us are just in our heads. I know I went through that stage. And then now I'm more in a stage where I'm learning to find my relationship with my body and with everything around me as more divine and appreciate it more and sink down into almost averageness, and it's more liberating than the other stage, I think. For me it feels more gentle and loving.
Yeah, I can definitely see critics of like spirituality being like, oh, anyone who practices like the woo woo stuff is just like, it's like an infantile regressive, stage of development that they're stuck in. Like they just want to escape the responsibilities of like holding down a job or like making relationships or like what have you. Operating as a responsible, grown person in the world. Um, but I think that's why it is important to, not take like this dualistic, like, oh, like the world is evil and I just want to like, escape to like the higher realms and like meditate all day in a cave mentality to it, and like really become like a self-actualized like individual who is productive and makes the most of their time here and puts forward the effort to like make the world a better place. um, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there must be, like Plotinus says, there has to be a reason that our soul, if it's seen as descending from source and descending into a body, then there has to be something really beautiful and desired about this incarnation, this experience about being on Earth. Um, we want so much to return or escape it, but there's this toggling back and forth. And I think, the more we can radically accept everything that is around us and in us, you know, to take it back to Jung, that's the integration, integrating everything and not try and maybe transmuting. There's a transfiguration that happens. There's an evolution that happens, but it's still like you're gathering everything that is and accepting it and loving it.
Totally. And like I think it's important to point out that like just because we're seeking to like integrate whatever it is that's going on within us and around us, that doesn't mean like, we have to necessarily like put up with it or like we have to surrender to it in the sense of like not having agency in regards to it, because there can be things that present themselves to us, um, especially like in the outer world where it's like the right response is to resist or to like modify ourselves in such a way as to like not succumb to what's happening in the outer world. And I think even in to certain regards, like in our internal state as well, like just because we have thoughts or desires or certain things that we spontaneously have come up doesn't mean like integrating it, yeah, sure, like not denying it, not repressing it, but it doesn't mean it needs to be like actualized. And there are things that are better to be like resisted, you know what I'm saying, um as well. But certainly like integrating in terms of like the things that come up that may not mesh with our highest self or our purpose or how we want to move forward in the world for our own actualization's sake. We it's not necessarily like, oh, like I'm just going to deny this or I'm going to like repress it or I'm going to be like violent towards it. But there is an aspect of like understanding what that urge or that desire or that um, thought train of thinking is trying to like convey. Well, my point is just that, you know, we don't have to, like, there is like agency in regards to like our self actualization, and it's not just like surrendering to whatever's coming up, whether in our environment or within ourselves. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to surrender, to get to the surrender without maybe trying to understand what it really is. What is, I mean, in my own kind of work, I find that resistance only makes things like when I'm thinking about, maybe intrusive thoughts or anxieties or fears, like when I try to resist it, then it just seems to grow. When I try to let go a little bit of that resistance and then inquire and be curious and accept it in kind of a way, like get close to it, like confront turn around and confront the dogs that are chasing you or the wild animals that are chasing you in your dreams. You can look face to face and see what that is, and it's not so scary. And maybe there's a reason behind it, or there's a false belief behind it. And when you start to understand it and accept it, and like not accept it in a way that, I mean, I guess there's different ways you can like understand the word or the act of accepting, but in the goal of diffusing the energy.
yeah, yeah, that's true for sure. I do like on 38, he says, where is it? Going again on the theme of the two worlds, there is continuity between the two worlds. They are the same thing at two different levels. Plotinus insists strongly on the continuity of, quote, our world. He writes, it is not separate, it's not separated from the spiritual world. Um, Plotinus was vigorously opposed to the anthropomorphism of Plato's Timaeus. The visible world was not the work of a creator who had fashioned it by reasoning and reflecting. What was your take on his, opposition to the notion of anthropomorphized creator, and how do you feel like that sits in with his emanation understanding of the physical world being like a reflection of like the good in some sense?
Could you ask the last part of your question again? I want to make sure that I get it.
Yeah, like, so he's against the notion of an anthropomorphized creator.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, and so how does that sit with his theory of like being an emanationist, so to speak, in terms of the physical world being kind of like, an emanation of the good?
That's a really good question. I feel like, well, for Plotinus having this idea that the one is emanating kind of like the sun, it seems almost more like an understanding of, like a Stoic understanding of natural philosophy, or like a world that doesn't need any sort of outside intelligence to create. And for Plato, he does see two worlds. He sees the intelligible world, the world of forms, and then the sensible world. And it's like he has this craftsman, he has this God that's not like source, but it's a God that used the forms as like a person would use a blueprint for a house to create everything. And I don't know. I think with Plato's version, it opens up more possibility for conflict and maybe like this, like sort of things to go wrong. But with Plotinus and having like this more of an emanation, it almost seems like we can be assured or trust in what is created because whatever's going to happen is just natural. There's no, like when you look at creation stories of the past, like something always goes wrong. And maybe by having, not an intelligent person, like a personality in charge of everything, maybe it's more like secure.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with you that it definitely rings to more of like a not like an intelligent designer,
Hmm.
um, craftsman type thing, as much as um, like a natural. I don't know, is it natural theology? But like, yeah, like a natural, more of like a natural organic unfolding of the emanations and them coming down into the physical. It says on the next page on 39, the material world is nothing other than the visibility of these forms and is therefore to be explained by them. The forms, for their part, have no need to be explained. It is useless to seek out the cause or their goal. So I really like this idea that like the material world is not separate from the forms. It's like the visible aspect. Um, and then it says later down this on the page, it says, oh, I thought it was really cool how he says the forms are basically like living beings. Um, the world of forms is animated by a single life, a constant movement, which engenders the different forms. It is like a single organism which finds its raison d'etre within itself and differentiates itself into living parts. So it's more of this like organic unfolding of one life, which is the good and the source of everything. And that is also like the life force of the forms, and that the forms are the invisible, intelligible um, presence of the material world. So, it's like this there's no need for a creator to fashion the material world. It's just like a flower blossoming. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. So you can rest easily. There's no enemies or nothing to, I guess, wish that they were any different. Although, and I guess it speaks to how Neoplatonism not only is taking from Plato, but also from Aristotle, who thought that there were no separate forms outside of any particulars. They're within the particulars. Um, and yeah, it seems like there's more of a connection in Neoplatonism. Like our souls are connected to the world soul, to the all. And I think there's I don't know where it is, but it's kind of like we have our soul that we're connected to, but a part of our soul stayed with like source in the intelligible realm. Do you remember that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
Yeah, it's kind of like we don't have all of our soul like with us in the incarnation. Part of it stayed with source, with like the one.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, I feel like I've read that somewhere and I'm not making it up. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
know it does. I definitely think he does say at some point that like there's an aspect of our soul that is continually with source for sure,
mhm.
and that's like our deepest self. But I couldn't tell you where.
Yeah. So much of this book is so great, though. I mean, it's like I just almost want to like go in my channel and read it word for word all the way through because it's so great. And I like how much Hadot quotes from Plotinus. So it's like you actually, even if you haven't read the Aeneids, you still get such a good insight into, what the primary text says.
Totally. Yeah, he does have lots of good quotes directly from Plotinus, which is nice. And he also quotes other people too, which is cool to see how Plotinus's work has influenced, like you mentioned earlier, Bergson. And it's interesting here. He says on page 41 that you know, it's is it not from Plotinus that Bergson derived his conception of the immediate, his critique of finalism, and his sense of organic totalities? This notion that like also on page 40, like hieroglyphs being examples of forms, like it's like this one image that depicts like a whole idea, and that's kind of like what the forms are. Uh, yeah, it's like this wholeness reflecting into the material plane, um, that is visible. I do like also, let's see what it says. Let's see if I can find this real quick. That was called vision. Sorry.
No, no, you're good. Take your time.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to keep looking for it. But yeah, no, I do like the book a lot. I could see you wanting. It's not that long, you know, so it's like something you could probably even pull off, just like reading it word for word, or like at least long sections of it.
Yeah. Or just like the introduction itself. The
Oh,
introduction
the introduction's so perfect because it
was
like
so
really,
good.
yeah. Well, it does such a good job at like covering the whole book, but like just highlighting like super important and like key parts of it. So
hmm
yeah, if you read that on your channel, that'd be perfect because it really catches the whole thing pretty well.
Oh, and when I read in the introduction, I think it was also in like the first chapter, that Hadot, this is on page 5. As Hadot has shown in detail in antiquity, philosophy was a style of life. The philosopher was less a professor than a spiritual guide. And I just remember you saying to me once that you would rather, rather than teach, you would rather like focus on spirituality.
Well, yeah, like maybe like a spiritual director or something. Like I
hmm
don't, it says, call no man on earth your teacher, for you have one teacher who's in heaven. And
Mm,
so I don't really like the notion of being like people. I've heard people be like, "Oh, you should be a teacher." I'm like, nah. Like I refuse to be a teacher. But yeah, like a spiritual director, like something more along those lines, which is basically what like a philosopher was back in the day in ancient times. So
yeah, I mean, even in philosophy class today, and I think it's Carl Rogers, the psychologist who had like client-centered therapy or student-centered teaching. You don't have to necessarily, as a professor, be someone who like sees themselves as an expert and is like passing down information. Of course, there's like some of that you have to do, but for the most part, in my philosophy classes, we're like thinking together. There's not necessarily a right answer. I definitely don't have the right answers. These are just questions to explore and to, practice thinking ourselves.
totally, I do think it's really cool that you're uh, a teacher.
Thanks. I like it. You know, it validates all the book reading that I do because I can always just say that I'm preparing for a lecture.
Yeah, I need that excuse in my life for real. Oh,
And I know we've talked about it, but I really love this idea of being a receptacle, and there's also like this in waiting and just kind of like looking at these moments of ecstasy. It says on page 5, Platinian philosophical life consists in a long waiting, patient preparation interrupted by brief but vivid ecstasies, during which the soul reaches its end and its goal. So it's like these moments are. full of bliss. And we can't necessarily chase them or obtain them or possess them, but we just have to be ready for when, it's like a bird that comes upon, our balcony. Like we just have to wait for it to come. And then on the next page, on page 6, it says, "It is as if someone were waiting to hear a long desired voice. He turns away from all other sounds and awakens his ear to the best of all audible things, lest it should happen by. It is the same for us in this world. We must leave behind all sensible hearing, unless it is unavoidable, and keep the soul's power of perception pure and ready to hear the voices on high." Like to me, that sounds very like biblical. Like I think of, I don't know, like the 10 bridesmaids in Matthew, like the ones
Mm,
that, are just they have to wait and because you never know when like the bridegroom will come.
totally. Yeah, I really enjoy his continual like framing of things being like you said earlier, like the Taoist notion of like what is it? Wu Wei or
Yeah.
yeah, non-action.
Yeah, because sometimes like things just seem so impossible, you know? I was thinking like I used I love like how practical it is. Like I guess this is like a little personal, but I don't mind sharing it with everybody. When I went no contact with my family before did that, it seemed impossible, like because of the guilt and just how I would do it, and if I was going to be able to do it, would I have, my family trying to like contact me all the time, like can I be free? And it just seems, I just couldn't do it. And so I stopped trying to think about how I would do it or when I would do it. And then I just kind of went back to meditation and went back to, whatever self-help podcasts I was listening to. And then one day it just became like I couldn't not do it. And maybe like there are other examples that would be less like maybe that's like a really heavy example, so I apologize if it is, but it makes things that seem impossible absolutely like accessible and possible. And it seems like it's kind of magical. Like, how did it happen? It feels like there's a bit of grace in there.
Totally. No, I agree completely. And that's why I really love how he draws out the concept of grace as being like essential for his part of the process. It does say on I found finally through my notes, I found a couple of things. And thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a powerful example. And you know, I'm sure everyone's dealing with things where they could like use that grace to be able to do what seems insurmountable.
Mhm.
And so yeah, thanks again for sharing that. It says on page 58, in mystical ecstasy, the soul abandons all forms and becomes a formless reality, a pure presence that's at the center of reality. Um, and it reminds me of this quote, or it's actually a book title by the guy who wrote Hardcore Zen. He wrote another book called God Does Not Exist and He Is Always With Me. Um, and then, so yeah, I thought that was funny. And then that name of the book is funny. And then, so also it says on page 58, let's see here, let's see if I can find this real quick. Is this the one I'm talking about? Sorry. Yeah, no. So I wrote a note here. It says, if our world is one of form and God is formless, God doesn't exist in our world. There is no God in our world. Yet this formless God is the source of all things in the world. How can a formless God be the source of all form that makes up the world while not being present in it? And then I was like, well, emanation, duh. And then, therefore, Plotinus is mystical ecstasy. We bypass the intermediary stages of emanation and are caught up in the in God directly, only because the deepest part of our true being is formless as well.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about our last podcast and the pre-Socratics and Parmenides, going through the signs of the goddess that's kind of dropping some wisdom on him and saying that, whatever you what is it? I don't want to get like Parmenides wrong, but the idea that I had from it, so
Yeah.
could be from Parmenides, that whatever yeah, okay, no, it is. So because Parmenides is saying that nothing, that the truth, the reality does not change and it's eternal. And so whatever passes away is not. And because we pass away, and we come about, we are born, then, that asks, like, well, what is the true self then? The true self is not any of the things about yourself that changes, according to Parmenides. And it makes me think of what you just said about how maybe God is connected to us because the part of ourselves that are true is formless, is without form.
Hmm.
And I really like on page 59 how it's explained how mystical union feels. Because I think that's like a big question about, I think maybe my students might want to know like what it feels like. And I think that a lot of us might have difficulty articulating it, but it says here in mystical union, the soul experiences a feeling of certainty, well-being, and pleasure. And this is from the Aeneids at that moment. And I like love this. I don't know why, but I like everything about it, like how it's articulated. At that moment, she can judge well and know that it was him she had been desiring, and affirm that there is nothing greater than him. In the other world, there is no possibility of deceit. Where could she find something more true than the true with a capital T? She says it's him. She enunciates this later. For the moment, she says it in silence. She is filled with joy, and she is not mistaken just because she is filled with joy. She does not speak in this way because her body is tickled with pleasure, but because she has become once again what she was before, when she was happy. She says she despises everything which used to give her pleasure. If everything else round her were to be destroyed, that would be just what she wanted, so that she could be close to him in solitude. Such is the joy to which she has acceded.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, no, I just remember writing down here, I don't love the lack of the world here, where it says that if everything else could be destroyed, that'd be just what the soul wanted, because then she would be close to him in solitude.
Uh-huh.
And this is like one of those things that we were saying earlier about like he's kind of like, on the one hand, like this world is the spiritual world, but the visible form, and then on the other hand, being like this whole world could like be destroyed and it would be good because then there would just be like the spiritual world, which is kind of like this weird dichotomy. I feel like in his own thinking that kind of trips me up a little bit. Like
Yeah.
I don't know where he lands, but where I keep coming back to time and time again is that like he doesn't have like any ill wish for the world or his body, even though he like by some accounts like he didn't take care of it very well.
Mhm.
um it's just a matter of him feeling like he doesn't want these, like they're only unpreferential insofar as they are a veil that separates us from our true self and the good, right? Like it's not that he actually wants the material world to be destroyed so he can just be in ecstasy with the good. It's that he wants everything in the material world that keeps us from that ecstasy to be like done away with, like no longer an obstacle to that union.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it can be kind of addicting. Like we think about, like this is in the chapter of love, and we think about human love, how amazing it can be when we meet someone that we align with, and that Plato says in, I think it's in the Phaedrus, that it's better to love than be loved. Um, and I think it can be sort of addicting to want to stay in a heightened state of, eros and arousal and desire and creativity. But he talks often about how we have to toggle back and forth. And I think just because these heightened states are so irresistible and intoxicating, he says, like the intoxication of ecstasy, he doesn't want to deny what else exists, what we are tied to, because that is who we are. And probably if we existed continually in this blissful state, this union with the divine, we wouldn't exist. Like we would burn out.
Yeah.
It would be too much light, you know?
Hmm. Exactly. No, good point. I'm trying to find this other thing too. It says on next page or page 60, wait, where'd it go? Oh yeah, 61. The terrors of the Gnostics seem ridiculous to him. Um, Let them abandon the tragic tone they adopt when they talk about the so-called dangers of the celestial spheres, rather, which in reality provide all joys for mortal men. And then I had to mention this because to me it's like super, it brings to mind something super interesting. Let me see if I can find my note on it. The terror of the Gnostics.
Well, did you read the footnote? That's
Mm-mm. Oh, yeah, I did, but let's see here.
some Gnostic sects, because it explains it, right? Some Gnostic
Hmm.
sects held that after death, the soul would have to ascend through the celestial spheres, each of which was guarded by a demon or a series of demons. The only way of getting past them was to know the appropriate password. And I didn't know that. That it says that the memorization of which was a vital part of Gnostic teaching. That's total. Like I have read this 800-page Gnostic Bible, and I am just like, I did not come across that.
That's so funny.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's just wild to me. But
it
I
is
mean, there is a tradition, even in like esoteric Judaism and the Kabbalah, about the dangers of such like a high vibration or such a realm of like when there's this parable in esoteric Judaism about these four. I don't know if they're like rabbis or somewhat that there's something like, and they go up to the heights, and one becomes mad, one becomes a heretic, one I think gets destroyed, dies, and then one, like lives. But it's kind of like our desires to reach the heights of whatever it is, whether it's love or divinity or creativity or whatever. Like we have to be fit for that. Like we have to not be completely absorbed and sort of destroyed by it.
absolutely. Um, I had to pull up a different book in reference to what this made me think of.
Hmm.
It's a book by Robert Lloyd, The Knowledge That Leads to Wholeness, The Gnostic Myths Behind Jung's Theory of Individuation.
Ooh.
And it says there was a Syrian Gnostic named Bardassian, and he imagined the soul as a creation of the archons, the rulers of the material universe who worked for the demiurge, the chief architect of mortal existence. The archons can be imagined to be the archetypes of the psyche. In ancient times, they would have been equated with the planetary rulers, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, etc., and the constellation governors, Aries, Gemini, Scorpio, etc., of the zodiac. These powerful authorities shaped human destiny, and no mortal could escape their influence or will. Bar, Bar Bardacian imagined the human soul as their creation. He pictured the soul as having been created by the archons in their spheres, and this is what made me think of it, going through the spheres or whatever,
Hmm.
uh, of existence, in their sphere of existence, known as the seven spheres. These spheres are the home of the archons. I'm sorry, home of the archetypes, also known as archons, that are considered to be below the realm of the divine uh, beings of the fullness. In other words, the seven spheres of the archons sorry, is a psychic realm below the spiritual realm of the fullness. Um, and then also it says to review the whole. Okay. Mm. So yeah, why I brought it up because this book that passage is from um, goes into like that very thing, and then how for Jung's theory of individuation, it was basically a matter of like integrating the archetypes to an extent, right? So like their powers and their influences, and then but not like their influence, well, their powers and their not to be influenced by them like blindly, but to basically um, take in their wisdom, but not like be directed by them directly. Um, let
That
me
is
see
so
here.
interesting. What's the title and the author?
Yeah, it's the knowledge that leads to wholeness,
Okay.
the Gnostic myths behind Jung's theory of individuation. Um,
So cool.
sorry.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I guess what I was saying doesn't really apply, but it's more like, okay, so then it reminds me of maybe like some spiritual conspiracy theories like that go around even today. Like there's this idea that when you die, you shouldn't go into the light because it's a trap and it'll make you like reincarnate again.
Isn't that like from the Tibetan Book of the Dead?
Oh, is it? I don't know. I mean,
I
I've
think
just seen it on TikTok, so
I think that's where
it
they
could
got
have an
it
ancient
from.
origin.
I think that's yeah. I mean, I think there's something to
Collective.
that in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They talk about how to like not get reincarnated into the this world, and I think that's part of it. It's like
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think you're not supposed to do like anything. It's very, I think if I remember it correctly, which I haven't looked into it too much, but from what I remember looking into it a little bit, it's a lot like a very Platonian like approach of like you'll have this one person like come up to you and be like, "Hey, like let's go to paradise," and like you don't go, like you just don't do anything. You just like sit there in like complete stillness, and like no matter what like terrifying or enticing comes your way,
Yeah.
you don't get scared and you don't follow anybody anywhere, and then you just dissolve into the Godhead or whatever. But I could be wrong. I mean, don't quote me on that directly, but that's the gist that I remember getting.
Okay. No, I mean, this seems like a book I need to read then.
Separate.
Good. And one thing I was thinking of also our last podcast about how we were talking about, we were kind of going back and forth about, what it would mean to return to source and be sort of absorbed and connected into that unification, that unity. And if I remember right, you were kind of resisting it because, what does that do to individuality? And it seems like you wouldn't, I think you said, it seems like you wouldn't have freedom if you were completely absorbed into the collective. And I thought there was a really interesting quote on page 3 about that. And it's like you can have both. It says, the true self is situated in the realm where all beings are within each other, where each is the whole and yet remains itself. So it's kind of like you are there is union, but there's also individuality and freedom, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think my point was that it wasn't like giving up freedom, that like it was true freedom.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, in the sense of like our true self's freedom, like, because then, uh, there might be like a loss of individual personhood, so to speak.
Hmm.
But that's like our false self that's like dissolving away, right? We might want to come out of there and be like, hey, I want to get some Taco Bell and like veg out and like watch like some Netflix. But like in reality, like, I think we'd all be on the Plotinus's like point of view, of like wanting to inhabit that world more and more, and not like wanting to come back to the material plane insofar as it was like a hindrance to the contemplation of the one or the good. Um, Plotinus says on page 62, where to go? Yeah, this is what I've been trying to find for like a long time. Sorry. Um, let's see. For Plotinus, as for Plato, vision consists in contact between the inner light of the eye and the exterior light. Um, and so vision is basically a relationship between the inner and the outer light. Um, and then I wrote a note that says vision or perception, without which there is no reality of which to speak, consists in a relationship between inner and outer light that is. My notes are so convoluted because I'm using this stupid thing. Sorry. That is between subject and object. No subject can stand in complete isolation to an object, and no object can exist without a subject. This is why reality is transsubjective or interrelational. Um, and then I wrote, let's see if I wrote more on that. Sorry. Huh. Okay. I think my kid ripped out a page of my notes. I had this big long like thing on that, and I think it's gone. But he likes this notebook a lot, and sometimes he like messes with it, and it's gone.
It must have been a really good page if your kid.
I know, right? He's like,
So,
his mind now. I was super like wanting to dive into that, but oh well.
is it the idea that, I mean, he says on page 63, we must believe that when we have seen him when suddenly the soul is filled with light, for this light comes from him and is identical with him. And this is the real goal for the soul, to touch and behold the life itself. It's kind of like the idea that you can only see what you are. And so there's this division or this dissolution between any kind of separateness, like, um, yeah.
Yeah, okay, let me see here. Yeah, it is something along those lines. Um without okay. Yeah, that page is totally gone, but I found some of it, so I'll read that.
Okay.
Um so I said this is basically why I'm a relational voluntary idealist. Because without an experience of reality, no reality can be said to exist. To be is to be perceived, as Berkeley said. Quote unquote, obviously, for no conscious organisms, if no conscious organisms exist in the universe would still exist. Therefore, the universe itself must be an experiential being, or else be related to um, some transcendent conscious being. The question that plagues me is why is there such a thing as awareness without personhood? If there is, then it may be said that there is no personal meta-aware God who's a person in whom or by whom or through whom the universe has its being. For if there is not, then it must be the case that the reason why God is personified is because there is an existential personal aspect of the ultimate reality behind or within the cosmos. Um, I think at my best times, I think both of these are kind of true at the same time. That God is both personal and impersonal. Um, on the one hand, it's true that there is an impersonal consciousness, albeit not meta-conscious, or that is to say, it's not aware that it is aware. Um, that is kind of it's like a subconscious or unconsciousness behind the cosmos. But if nothing else, this impersonal consciousness manifests as a personal meta-consciousness or a self-aware person by way of realizing himself or itself in us, through us, and to us. That is to say, by our experience of discovering God as a personality, um, is God's experience of becoming self-aware as of himself as a person. Um, Thus, God is both personal and impersonal, always aware, but only sometimes aware of the fact that he is aware.
That's really interesting. Have you read Alfred North Whitehead's process theology? Because it sounds a lot like that.
No, it's a very intimidating book. I would love to read it sometime, though.
I think it is as well. I haven't read it all, but he talks about that, the sort of like God realizing himself through ourselves and God becoming as we are becoming in just like the last chapter. It's like in part five, and it's that part is not super intimidating. It's pretty clear.
Did you skip to the end?
Yeah, I only read the end. Because I started reading it, and then I
Yeah.
was like, I don't understand this, so I'm just going to read the conclusion. And I realized that the conclusion was what I wanted to read all along because I wanted to read his ideas on God.
I think it's so funny how you like have a tendency to jump to the end of books. It's like the best.
Yeah,
Um,
but yeah,
and then I say, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
And then I say, moreover, as to why I'm a voluntarist, our attitude informs the world of phenomenon we perceive, which is a function of our will or volition. Consciousness and volition are fundamental constituents of the world, and they are spiritual qualities. Plato's see, Plato's love. Okay, I think this is a second or secondary note here, but yeah, so that's why I think volition is super important. Um,
I would agree. I mean, I think I often land on the both and rather than the either or feeling the most true and real. That we are both being and becoming, we are both created and creating.
Definitely. Like why settle for one side of the equation?
Yeah, that's what the Libra in my chart says. So
I think
let's just take it all. Well, we are at, I think, like the top of the second hour. Do we want to think about like closing this up? I know like we could probably talk about it for three more, but
yeah, I got a lot of us to go through, but yeah, we can wrap it up. My kids are probably like, "What happened to Dad?"
yeah, and I have an assignment that I have to do for my cosmology class that's due this evening. So
Very good. Yeah,
yeah.
let's wrap it up.
But I did want to say a bit about the author before we left, because I looked up some information about him and I thought he himself, Pierre Hadot, was really interesting. So he lived from 1922 to 2010. He was a philologist, a scholar, and a historian of ancient philosophy, Plato, the Stoicism, and Neoplatonism, born in Paris, France. But he was a Catholic and ordained as a priest and like studied the Greek and Latin texts. And he basically got ordained in like his early 20s. And then when he left it, he just committed himself to the academic study of philosophy. And he had like the cosmic experience when he was younger that just connected him to like the vastness of the cosmos. And his wife is also a scholar of like the same subjects. So I just thought like it's always interesting to look at the background, the biography of the authors.
For sure. No, that's cool. You had like a kind of like a mystical experience that kind of set him
Yeah.
to studying the stuff like obviously very deeply and profoundly. So thanks for the background.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware he was a ordained minister of the Catholic Church. That's cool.
Yeah.
Uh, I would say I did think that his chapter on presence and um, him getting into how aware Plotinus was of those around him and how attentive he was to
Mm.
their needs and always making himself available to anybody and everyone who needed you know something from him. Like he was never like one to shoo someone away and be like, can't you see I'm like contemplating the good here, like what are you doing here? Like he was always very present, and I feel like that presence that he shared with those around him and his environment in general was part and parcel of his like mystical path.
Mhm.
And I think it's like super interesting how that's basically like what true religion is like the careful observation of reality for the purpose of properly relating to it. um, that's like how we you know join with the good basically. And so I just feel like he embodied it really well. At least that's the picture I get from the author describing his life and how he interacted with others.
Yeah, I really appreciated that too. It's like he felt that the spiritual path, if it doesn't transform you and your relationships in the concrete world, then, what is it really doing or benefiting?
Yeah, and his life like lived it out and showed it as like it was beneficial, um, you know, not only for himself but for those around him. So cheers to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad that you agreed to read this, and I really loved it too. I didn't know what it was going to be about. It was just one of those books on my shelves that I had bought and then was hoping to get to eventually.
Well, yeah, I'm super stoked. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Yeah, it's a good one for sure. Highly recommend it.
That's great. And I'm excited about our next one. Have you started the Berdiev yet?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of like note taking, even though I was using this ridiculous binder that like makes it super complicated because I was like writing on the backside of double parallel like yeah, it's kind of a long story, but yeah. So I was preparing a lot for this. I haven't dived too deep into the Berdiev's Freedom and Slavery, but I have started it. How about you?
No, I haven't yet, but I'm glad that I have spring break coming up because I figure I I might not be able to start it until then. So, but
Okay, when is spring break coming up for you?
like the last week of March.
Nice,
Yeah.
awesome.
So,
All
but I
right,
look forward to it. I'm really excited. Um,
yeah. Thanks so much.
yeah, thank you for coming on. This is a great discussion, and I still feel like I'm such a beginner with Neoplatonism, but this felt very grounding for me. So I appreciated all your thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel like it's such a good introductory Neoplatonist book. So
Yeah.
thank you for suggesting it.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, thanks to everyone who is listening. Comment wherever you're listening at, and just keep the conversation going, I guess.
Adios.